Well, the question that everybody is thinking about, of course, as we look at the start of the season is, can anyone beat Sebastian Vettel and the Red Bull, the winners of the last two championships? Vettel became the youngest ever world champion, then the youngest ever double world champion, and there's a lot of expectation that he'll become the youngest ever triple world champion. He's phenomenal, and the car that he's been driving is just as phenomenal and maybe even more. Designed, of course, by Adrian Newey, who is the kind of presiding genius of Formula One technology, and everybody's waiting to see what Newey's come up with for this season to give Vettel the chance of dominating as he's done for the last 2 years.
You're going to see a big push this year from both Lewis Hamilton and Jenson Button, and on pre-season testing, which is again difficult to judge, I would be looking at Jenson especially to be challenging Sebastian Vettel. What we have with Jenson is there are new tyres this year, still manufactured by Pirelli. They're a slightly softer compound and will require probably looking after a little bit better. Now Jenson does that superbly. His driving style lends itself to that. He may well work the tyres just a bit better, and if he has a competitive car from the off, that may put him that tiny bit closer to Sebastian over Lewis. Nonetheless, if Lewis gets a big start, he's an extraordinary driver. He gets a good start, he builds some momentum, gets some points. He will begin to feel that he can beat Sebastian Vettel. Now, he thinks he can already. Once he sees the points on the board and he's actually achieving it, then he will have a feeling of superiority and the confidence that goes with it. That's terribly important. Either of those two drivers, I would expect to be there or thereabouts at the end.
McLaren seem to be the team who are benefiting most from consistency. Consistency of approach to the design of the car and consistency of personnel on the technical side as well. Whereas Ferrari have made a big change. Last year they sacked Aldo Costa, one of their top technical men. They brought in Pat Fry from McLaren at the back end of last season. They've had a pretty troubled time during pre-season testing.
Concerned that they were too conservative last year, they've adopted a more radical approach, a more revolutionary approach to their car. It's not a pretty car in comparison to the McLaren. But again, no one at Ferrari is going to mind if an ugly car wins the championship. Unfortunately, what looks like being the case this year is that they have an ugly car, and certainly at the start of the season, it's not going to be a very quick car. Fernando should be fighting with Sebastian, he should be fighting with Lewis, he should be fighting with Jenson. And one has to hope for the sake of the championship he is. It looks like he's going to have trouble.
Mercedes is another that made big changes on their engineering side. Ross Brawn, who's sort of in charge of he's the team principal, he brought in 3 very experienced designers from other teams. So they have a very, very experienced superstructure on the technical side. And Brawn is pretty confident that they'll make the significant increase in performance that they need if they're to justify Mercedes' involvement in the team. If the Mercedes does turn out to be a front-running car, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens, because they've got 2 extremely good drivers at more or less opposite ends of their careers. Michael Schumacher coming back now in his early 40s, having had 2 disappointing seasons.
It looks like Mercedes have put a good car underneath him. They will be looking to challenge Red Bull and McLaren from the off, and I think it's very possible they will be doing that. They will certainly be looking at podiums. Mercedes does not take part in the Formula One World Championship just to compete. Mercedes is there to win, and Michael is central to that. He's a proven winner. He's a world champion.
I think Rosberg is a serious talent and is a potential world champion. He's come up quite quietly, several unspectacular seasons with Williams, but in the last 2 years with Mercedes, he's looked very good.
If they are in a straight fight with Red Bull and McLaren, then it'll be interesting to see whether team orders come into play and who is given preference, whether it would be Michael or it would be Nico.
There are rule changes practically every year, and the principal one this year is to ban the use of what are called blown diffusers. Adrian Newey made the first and best use of blown diffusers last year, and that was really the factor that gave last year's Red Bull its great advantage. He's not going to be able to do quite the same thing this year. All the designers have spent the winter working out how, while staying within the boundaries of the new rules, they can use the same thing to perhaps recover some of the effect that the rule makers wanted them to forfeit. I went to see Ross Brawn last week at Mercedes, and he admitted, that's going to be, loopholes are what Formula One's all about. They've got to find the loophole in this regulation, find a way of using the exhaust gases to produce the downforce that they'd lost. And that could be the key to the whole season. Who's got the best answer to that?
The change to the rules around blocking manoeuvres. You can make one move off the racing line in order to block another driver. However, if you then move back onto the racing line, say as you're coming into the entrance to the corner where you're looking to take your line again, you have to leave 1 car's width between your car and the edge of the track. This is incredibly complex. It's more complex when you're in a motor racing car and you're trying to decide how far it's exactly 1 car's width between the edge of my car and the edge of the track. The purpose, of course, is to leave that car's width so that you can move back towards the racing line, but that a car who is following can still overtake on that racing line. And it's going to be quite difficult to interpret, which is going to mean a huge job for the stewards.
Sebastian Vettel is a great driver. In terms of talent, he's on the same level as Hamilton and Alonso, I would say. And Adrian Newey is clearly the best Formula One designer who's ever lived. I think there's no doubt about that, if you look at his record. So can anyone challenge them? It depends very much on how Newey has responded to the new regulations, whether he's found something that can maintain his advantage or whether he's been brought back to the pack. I'd expect Mercedes to be very strong this year. They've had 2 years of faffing about, basically, and Mercedes don't do that. I think Ferrari will struggle to begin with, probably recover a bit of form, but won't have a great season. I think McLaren will be strong from the start and all the way through the season. And if there is a front runner, I think their challenger will be McLaren.